Hello friends and welcome to Smart Coach. Today we will be discussing the Russian Revolution and we will be discussing the causes today of the Russian Revolution. Now when we talk about the Russian Revolution, as a background you should understand that the Russian Revolution are a series of revolutions, alright. It is not just talking about just one revolution per se, but a series of revolutions. So the first one occurs in 1905 when there is a kind of revolt against the government of the Tsar, and then again in October, then again in 1917 there are two revolutions, okay. One in February, which of course according to the Gregorian calendar which we use, it is in March, and the second one is in October, okay. So according to the calendar that we use, it will be in November, alright. So we will get into all of these things about February being March and October being November. We will get into all these things when we explain the sequence of events, but for now we are looking at the causes, okay, of these upheavals that occur in Tsarist society. Now, as far as the revolution in Russia is concerned, which leads to the establishment of the first socialist state in the world, okay, under Lenin. So this is a very important revolution. We have to know about this revolution because much of the modern world, much of the world that we know of has been shaped by the ideas that emerged, okay, during this revolution. Much of modernity is hinged upon the competition between the socialist form of government and between the capitalist, that is democratic form of government, okay. So much of the modernity has been influenced by socialism also. So looking at it from that perspective, it is a very important event which occurred that happened in the 1917, all right, and it was influenced by the philosophy of Karl Marx, okay, who gave us the Marxist philosophy, okay, and from which we get the socialist and the communist mode of political systems, okay. Now, as far as concrete causes are concerned, you have to remember, as I keep on explaining, that when we are looking at a historical event, there are certain gradations of causes, and this can be political, social, and economical, okay. And actually understanding events through this kind of a perspective is also part of the Marxist way of looking at history, okay. So you understand how Marxism has influenced history also, and in order to know about the first experiment in Marxism in the real world, we have to study the revolution that occurred in Russia. So you get the point that it is a very important event in the history of the world, okay. So now, as I was saying, political, social and economical, the three gradations of events, and of course during a violent or a catastrophic event or during a sudden event, there is always a trigger, all right. If it is a long development, if it is a development which occurs in a long period of time, then maybe a trigger element is not present, okay. However, if it happens suddenly, then more often than not there is a trigger that leads to the occurrence of such events, okay. So Russian Revolution is not different. It has political, social and economical causes, and we can look at the causes of the Russian Revolution through these perspectives, okay. Now let us take the social causes of the Russian Revolution in the first stance, okay. Now in here you will find that the Tsarist Russia, okay, Russia under the Tsars were the rulers, the hereditary rulers of Russia, and they belong to the Romanov dynasty. The dynasty, their family were known as the Romanovs, okay. Now that is a very important thing to remember, Romanov, okay. So they belong to the Romanov dynasty, and the Tsars, they were known as Tsars, okay. It comes from the word Caesar, okay. So it has some Roman connotation also. Caesars were the rulers of Rome, and from that an alliteration of the word Caesar comes from an alliteration of the Roman word Caesar is Tsar, okay. So the Tsars used to rule Russia, and under this Tsarist Russia, you will find that society was divided into certain segments, okay. At the very bottom of society, which we will write first, of course, is the peasantry, okay. Now the peasantry are agriculturalists and they devote their life to agriculture, okay. That's what we know, all of us know. And apart from the peasantry, at the bottom of society is also a newly emergent working class, okay. See, Russia had not industrialized like Europe did, okay. Russia had industrialized very late, okay, in the 19th and the 20th century, but industrialization began in Europe somewhere in the 18th century itself, okay, in the last phase of 18th century itself, and it takes quite a bit of it picks up quite a lot of pace in Europe in the 19th century. However, Russia, it starts developing industries only in the 19th century, in the late part of 19th century. So, it is lagging in industries, but nonetheless, a new industrial working class is emerging in Russia, okay. So, a new industrial working class is coming up, and this class, according to Marxist parlance, okay, in the parlance, in the manner of you see, in the terminology of Marxism, this new class is known as the proletariat, okay, proletariat. All right, very important to remember, okay, the proletariat, that is the working class. So, a new working class is also present, and of course, this also occupies the lowest levels of society, okay. So, peasantry and the proletariat, the working class, together they make up the lowest level of society. Now, we also have the aristocracy, which is the highest section of society. The aristocracy people belonging to hereditary class, okay. This was a hereditary class, okay. So, the people belong to the aristocracy through the principles of hereditary. So, people born within some families were considered aristocrats, and they had certain privileges in society, okay. So, these privileges included ownership of land, these privileges included the exemption from taxation, these privileges also included what? It included state office, okay. So, ownership of land, sometimes exemption from taxation, and also offices, monopoly over offices, okay. So, these were the privileges that were present among the aristocrats. They owned a lot of land, okay, which we will discuss in the economic causes of the Russian Revolution. When discussing the economy of Russia, we will discuss that part also. However, for now, you have to understand that they owned much of the land in Russia. At the same time, they were exempted. In most cases, they were exempted from paying taxes, okay. And lastly, they also held monopoly over offices. Now, you would understand that when you look at the causes of the French Revolution, the causes are quite similar, okay. When we look at the class system within Russia, it is quite similar to what the French or what the country of France looked like at the eve of the French Revolution, okay. So, it is not much different, okay. However, don't confuse yourself and don't confuse Russian Revolution with French Revolution, but then of course, you see that there are certain things which are common in both, okay. There was also an aristocracy present in France, and they also had certain privileges, and people fought against these privileges during the French Revolution. So, we see these kind of privileges present in Russia also at the eve of the Russian Revolution, okay. Now, so we got the aristocracy and we've got the peasantry. Aristocracy has certain privileges, and these privileges are harming the Russian society as a whole, okay. And you have also to remember that these privileges were extra economic in nature, and they were harming the peasantry and the proletariat, okay, because the peasantry and the proletariat bore the brunt of the economic burden of Russia, okay. Now, moving forward, you see that there was another element within Russian society. So, number 1, number 2 and number 3 is the clergy, okay, and the dominance of the Russian Orthodox Church, okay. Russian Orthodox Church. So, the dominance of the Russian Orthodox Church also contributed greatly to the emergence of the Russian Revolution, because the Orthodox Church of Russia used to dominate the lives of the peasantry, okay. It used to dominate the lives of the proletariat, and the church was becoming more and more repressive. Now, if you look at all of the society, you see elements of the Russian society on the eve of the revolution, you will see that the revolution that occurred in France, they got rid of these particular elements, okay, these particular elements of society, that is the aristocracy and the dominance of the church, okay, or society. That's what happened during the French Revolution. As an outcome of the French Revolution, the aristocracy disappeared and the church and state were separated, okay, as an outcome of the French Revolution. However, the revolution had not had much of an impact in Russia. Russia was still, this should be the last thing which you discuss as far as the society is concerned, Russia was still socially trapped in a medieval system. Okay, so socially speaking, Russia was still trapped within a medieval system. It had not modernized, just like the rest of the world had modernized. So these, as you can see, are the social causes behind the Russian Revolution. Now, when we talk about the economic causes, you will understand how the social causes and the economic causes, they add up together. Okay, I have just discussed the social causes. Now, when we will discuss the economic causes, they will add up together, they will come together and then give you a better idea why the revolution occurs. Okay. So, we will look into that aspect also now. So, friends, we have talked about the social causes. Now, let us talk about the economic causes. When we are discussing the economic causes, first thing to remember while discussing economic causes is that 1.5% of the Russian population held about 25% of all land. Okay, 1.5% of the Russian population held 25% of all lands in Russia. This is something which is of great importance, and this 1.5% is the aristocracy. So, although the peasants were there, the peasants rarely, you see, had large tracts of land in order to produce you see, means more than their own sustenance. Okay, so the peasants in Russia were cultivating at the sustenance level, and they were not cultivating or were not being able to cultivate in an industrial level or in a level which is suited for a market. Okay, now apart from that, you will also have to remember that what I have been calling a peasantry had been serfs until recently. Okay, what are serfs? Serfdom is a state of bonded labor when the peasants were, you see, obligated to serve the aristocracy. The peasants at one point of time in Russia were obligated to serve the aristocracy, okay, and they were obligated, okay, by law to cultivate the lands of the aristocracy apart from the lands that they held, okay, and they were held in this position without any remuneration. Okay, so it was like a forced system of labor. Okay, so serfdom is like a forced system of labor. So, up until very recently, the peasants in Russia were all serfs, and by serf, I have already explained what serfdom was like. Okay, what serfdom is. Now, apart from that, you also have to remember that in 1861, the reforming Tsar Alexander II, who was a reforming Tsar who believed in the ideas of reforms, he had, you see, freed them in 1861. But there was a price that came with this freedom, and that was that the serfs had to pay, okay, pay the aristocracy back, okay, for the charges of their freedom. Okay, so a price was paid for the freedom by the serfs, okay, and that is how they became freed. And apart from that, another factor that you will have to look at is the factor that the serfs also were not distributed land. So, there was no redistribution of land. So, although they were free, they did not have land to cultivate. All right, they were now free from the obligation to cultivate the lands of the aristocracy without payment, but they were there was no land to cultivate. Okay, they were not at the you see, they were not at freedom to cultivate land because there was simply no lands. Okay, so they fell back to what? They fell back to the cultivation of land of the aristocracy for a minimal payment, or in some cases, since they had to pay the aristocracy for their freedom, they had to cultivate the land of the aristocracy for free again, all right, without getting paid, because they already had to make a payment for their freedom. So, this is the system in which the peasantry had found themselves even after the freedom of the serfs, okay, or emancipation of serfdom, which was made by Alexander II. Now, apart from this, another factor when we are discussing the economic causes is that Russia had been lagging in industries, okay, in industrialization. So we have to understand that the industrial revolution that occurred in England had not yet touched Russia with its changes, all right. So industrialization was lagging behind, and there was not much of industries present in Russia, and this resulted in a slump in the Russian economy. Now Russia used to be a great and powerful nation in the 18th century and in the 19th century, but come the 20th century, Russia had lagged behind from all nations in Europe. It was one of the poorest nations in Europe, and it does not simply command anymore the same kind of powers that it used to command, and this is because of the fact that it had lagged behind in its economy. And because of this, all right, Russian society was also feeling the pressure. Now apart from that, we also have to remember that a new class, however, of society had developed, that is the proletariat, which I already talked about while talking about the society. Russia had begun in the late 19th and the early 20th century to now it has begun to industrialize, and this new class that is coming up, it is finding it extremely hard to cope up with the rigors of industrialization. Why? Because the working hours are very long, okay, the working hours are very long, some even working on Sundays, all right, and the living conditions of the proletariat, okay. So when we are talking about the proletariat, what we have to talk about is the working hours, long working hours, and the living conditions. So some workers sharing their lodgings with 4 or 5 families, 16 people staying in the same room. This was what was happening in cities like St. Petersburg. So you can imagine the kind of hardships they had to face. Apart from that, the workers were paid minimum wages, okay. They were paid barely wages enough for the sustenance, all right, and the workers were working in this condition. And the workers came from where? They came from the peasantry itself, because the peasantry had no land, right? Remember, they had no land to cultivate, and therefore the peasantry migrated into the city, and now the cities had become, you see, hotbed of crime. The cities have become hotbed of squalid conditions, all right. So this is the condition of economic condition of Russia at the eve of the revolution. Now moving forward from the economic condition, now we come to the political conditions of Russia. And when political condition of Russia is concerned, we know one thing for fact, and that is Russia was a autocracy. Now there was no revolution, violent revolution in Britain. Of course, there was a revolution in Britain, all right, the English Revolution, and a constitutional form of monarchy had come up in Britain. In France, the French Revolution had taken hold. The concept of republic had emerged, all right. Constitution was the basis of most governments in Europe. In Russia, not so. In Russia, it was still an autocracy. Now, autocratic rule had begun with the successor of Tsar Alexander II. So autocratic rule and complete control of the Tsar over all aspects of Russian society, all aspects of Russian polity, this kind of a rule had begun with Tsar Alexander III, all right. And this mindset, this autocratic mindset of rule, this autocratic philosophy of rule was carried forward by Tsar Nicholas II, all right. Tsar Nicholas II, who is the last Tsar of Russia, he carried forward this autocratic mindset, all right. And it is because of this also that there was no liberal policies in Russia, okay. So Russia was completely out of the zone of liberalization of the polity. Now, however, we see that after the Bloody Sunday massacre of 1905, there was some kind of an idea of liberalization that came in, all right, and that was the Tsar, all right, he instituted the Duma, which was the parliament, all right. After the Bloody Sunday massacre, which we will shortly talk about, all right, he had instituted the Duma, all right, which was a parliament, which was the Russian parliament. However, he is also known to dissolve two Dumas, all right. He had dissolved two Dumas. Why? Because the Dumas turned out to be uncooperative towards the Tsar, all right. So this is the history of parliamentarism in Russia, and that's why you see that conditions in Russia were really appalling when it comes to the polity and political aspects also. Apart from that, you will also have to understand the fact that the Russian Tsars, they follow the policy of Russification. Now, what is Russification? It was as much a political policy as much as a cultural policy, and this policy followed the dictum of one Tsar, one church, and one Russia. All right. So, remember now, while understanding the concept of Russification, that Russia was an empire. It contained lands which did not contain. It included lands. It included territories which did not contain simply simply a Russian demographic. All right. So many kinds of people used to live within Russia. Also, among them there were Jews, Poles, Slavs. All right. So many kind of people used to live in Russia. However, the Russian Tsars, they followed a policy of Russification, where the Russian language became the basis, all right, or the official language of all of Russia. All right. The Tsar was the ruler of all of these nations which are occupied by Russia. All right. They must by definition follow the Church of Russia, which was the Orthodox Church. All right. Russian Orthodox Church. All right. So this was the kind of policy, cultural and social and political policy, which was followed by the Tsars. All right. And this also created much of friction within Russia, leading to an emergence of a movement known as the nationalist movements. Nationalist movements of minorities. So Russian minorities, they started movements in their home zones, all right, nationalist movements, and these nationalist movements, they fueled what kind of activity? They fueled subversive political activities that were meant to subvert the rule of the Tsars, all right. So all of these added up as causes for the Russian Revolution. So now, by now we have discussed the economic, the political causes also. However, what remains is to discuss the immediate causes, and as far as the immediate causes are concerned, there are two immediate causes, okay, since their revolution took place in gradations, in graduation, all right. So the first revolution took place in 1905. The first large scale protest against Tsarist regime took place in 1905, and the next one took place in 1917. There were two revolutions in 1917, the February and the October. That means the March and the November revolutions, all right. So both of them had their own triggers. For 1905, the Russo Japanese War, and for 1917, the First World War. Now let us look at the Russo Japanese War, the impact of the Russo Japanese War and the impact of the First World War. As far as the Russo Japanese War is concerned, the war occurred in 1904 when Japan, a newly emergent nation within the configuration of national powers all across the world, all right, imperial powers all across the world. So Japan was developing up as a newly emergent imperial power, a power which was seeking to grow into an empire, okay. It contested itself, all right. It contested itself with an old established imperial power, that is Russia, and Russia lost during this war, okay. The Russo-Japanese War was lost terribly by Russia, and this exposed the weaknesses of Russia's society, polity and the economy of Russia. It exposed the weaknesses inherent in the society, polity and the economy of Russia. Same thing occurred in the First World War also, when there were food shortages all across Russia, all right. Food shortages all across Russia, people were starving, and the Russian soldiers were being dealt defeat after defeat in the various battles all across Europe that were occurring, all right. Russia was not being able to win wars for a long time now, and because of this, the nationalistic spirit within Russia, was suffering, all right, it was going down, all right, and the Tsar could not simply rely on a nationalistic spirit to hold his empire anymore, all right. He could not appeal to nationalism to hold his empire, and it is because of this, as a result of the defeat in the Russo-Japanese War and the economic crunch that Russia had to go through because of the defeat in the Russo-Japanese War and the loss of the faith of people, that protesters came out in protest against the Tsar, and they were shot at, all right. They were shot at during a Sunday. It is therefore known as a Bloody Sunday, okay. So 1905 is known as the Bloody Sunday, massacre. So they were shot, all right, Bloody Sunday massacre, they were shot, all right, and this resulted in a loss of faith in Tsarist Russia, all right. However, after the institution of the Duma, therefore the Tsar relented and gave the Russians the Duma, all right. After the institution of the Duma, there was some kind of dying down of this movement, all right, dying down of this subversive movement against the Tsars, but this movement again picks up because of the because of Russian participation in the First World War and the occurrences of the events of the First World War, the losses of Russia in the First World War and the economic problems that Russia had to face during the First World War. Okay, so we see that 1917 and 1905 also played a great role in the emergence of the Russian Revolution. All right, the wars, the two wars, the Russo Japanese War and the First World War, they played a very important role in the emergence of the Russian Revolution. Last thing that you have to read about the Russian Revolution, let us deal with it, and that is Marxism. All right, and Leninism. Now remember that by the time the Russian Revolution occurs, all right, two kinds of philosophies had developed as an alternative, all right, as an alternative to what? To capitalism. And it is the philosophy of Marx that society is categorized by a dialectic nature. All right. All human societies have been progressing from one stage to another stage. So in the ancient period, the society was based on slave labor. In the medieval period, society was feudalistic in nature. In the modern period, society is capitalistic in nature. And after capitalism, what would come? Socialism, and then beyond that there is communism. Okay, so that's what Marx was trying to say, and his understanding of society was based upon the dialectic nature of society, that within every society there are two dominant strands of thinking and two dominant sections within that society. When these two sections of society and two sections of thought, they collide against each other, all right, a new change occurs. Okay, when dialectics, when the social dialectics, they collide against each other, a new change occurs. This is at the very basic of Marxism, all right. And I'm watering down, of course, because you are aspirants, UPSC aspirants. You don't have to understand sociology in all its detail and all its glory, all right. So I'm watering it down to a very great extent. However, this is what at the very basic what Marxism is, all right. And this within modern society, within modern Russian society, Leninism, all right, or Marxist Leninism, all right, or Marxism and Leninism, all right, this Leninism is an adjustment to Russian conditions, all right. So Marxist philosophy, when adjusted by Lenin to the conditions prevalent in Russia, it is known as Leninism or Marxist Leninism, all right. So going beyond Marxism, what we see, according to Marx, society in a capitalist state is categorized by two classes, all right, two dominant classes, the bourgeoisie, all right, and the proletariat. So these are the two dominant strands of society, and the proletariat will take over the bourgeois with a violent revolution, and a new society will come up, which is socialist society. Socialist society will develop itself and become the capitalist, stateless capitalist society. Okay, so this is what Marxism stands for. However, within Russia, proletariat is relatively new. When we talked about the economic conditions, I already told you proletariat within Russia is relatively new. It is not powerful. So Lenin had to adjust his idea of Marxism according to Russian condition, where the two sections of society in Russia included, all right, the lower section of society, although in the upper section it was the bourgeois, the lower section of the society included the proletariat and the peasantry, all right. So this was an adjustment made by Lenin. Now, what is the importance of Marxism, Leninism and the in the Russian Revolution? The fact is, this is the ideological basis of the Russian Revolution. The Russian Revolution was carried out through the ideology of Marxist Leninism, all right. So beyond that, beyond that we understand that Russian Revolution would not have been possible without the existence of the Marxist philosophy and Marxist-Leninist philosophy, because Russian Revolution was not grounded, all right, not grounded in the philosophy of liberalism, it was not grounded in the philosophy of utilitarianism, but it was grounded in the philosophy of Marxist-Leninism, okay. So this is also something which you have to discuss when you are discussing the causes of the Russian Revolution. So I hope we have dealt with the causes of the Russian Revolution in great and elaborate details, and I hope that you watch this video, if not one time, two times, three times, all right, in order to get a hang of what all of these elements mean in the emergence of Russia as the USSR, all right, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, all right. So I hope that you will be watching this video more than one times in order to get a good idea, and I hope that you will be studying hard. With that, I take your leave for today. Thank you.